The first casualty of war is truth. For almost 1 year now, the world is looking to Ukraine. And because this war has far-reaching consequences for almost everyone on the planet, everybody wants to know what will happen next. We all want to find out the truth. What is happening on the ground? Well, depending on who you ask, the answers vary dramatically. From US and Russian generals saying that Ukraine would fall within weeks in the beginning of the war, to almost weekly reports that Russia is running out of ammunition. We had it all in the last 10 months. In this video, we talk about the fog of war, how to read between the lines, and to decipher propaganda on all sides. Also, the necessity of lies in war in general, and how the conflict could continue in 2023. Welcome to WAGNER World. Weeks before the first Russian missiles hit Ukrainian cities, the Kremlin made a series of claims about the government in Kiev. Ukrainian forces, Russian state-sponsored television said, were committing genocide in the breakaway regions of Donetsk and Luhansk along the Russian border. To help paint Ukraine as the aggressor, doctored videos of alleged victims landed on social media. A bizarre factor in Russia's invasion of Ukraine is that most Western experts on the Russian military agreed with the Kremlin that Russia had a powerful army which would defeat Ukraine within 2 or 3 days. While there has been much analysis of how Russian imperial nationalist stereotypes of Ukrainians made them miscalculate, there has been no investigation of why Western experts exaggerated the strength of the Russian army and underplayed Ukraine militarily and as a resilient society. Propaganda has long been a feature of warfare, as adversaries try to win hearts and minds as well as battles. But with social media, the internet and smartphones, warring sites can now weaponize information with relative ease, speed and reach. As misinformation spreads online and then makes its way offline, a complex information environment takes hold, making it difficult to tell fact from fiction. And especially the war in Ukraine is fought with information. While Russian state media reached bizarre levels of propaganda weeks after the start of the invasion, Western media seems to predict a total collapse of the Russian army and the Ukrainian victory on a daily basis. But why? Well, because without knowing it, we are all part of this war, even if we don't want to be. The war in Ukraine is a war of attrition. Both sides are not only burning through huge amounts of ammunition and money, but also human lives and the morale of civilians. And to win a war, you need to win the hearts and minds of people first. And fighting in Ukraine affects not only residents of Kiev or Lviv, but people in Berlin, Paris, Moscow and Washington. To find some truth, we need to understand the objective of the information apparatus of each side. For example, the West's goal is to provide Ukraine with as much equipment as possible, to wear down the Russian military and to prevent the Kremlin's plan of taking huge chunks of Ukraine's territory and push Russia's borders far into the West. But military equipment is expensive, and you need a lot of funding to secure a continued flow of hardware. After the pandemic and with rising inflation, people in Europe have a much harder time than usual, so allocating money into a war zone needs appropriate support from ordinary citizens. And people are more likely to support something if there are signs of success. So regardless of the situation on the ground, most media outlets will paint a picture in favor of the Ukrainian side. Otherwise, German citizens, for example, would have second thoughts about sitting in a cold flat in December, or paying 3 times as much on electricity and heating. On the other side, the Russian apparatus has a much more difficult task. First of all, the state media must convince the population not only to bear economic burdens, but also to endanger the lives of sons, husbands and friends on the other side of the border. It is much easier to convince people to support a war when you're not directly involved. To create a threat situation that realizes this willingness in the population to support the Kremlin's plans, the enemy image of Ukraine was established long before the outbreak of the war. One famous example is the claim that Russia has to denazify Ukraine. Russia's foreign ministry accused Western countries of ignoring what it called war crimes in Ukraine, saying their silence encouraged the onset of neo-Nazism and Russophobia. This example shows how every side is trying to manipulate the truth to some extent, to favor their own narrative. For example, the Ukrainians certainly have problems with neo-fascist groupings like Azov. The group has drawn controversy over its early and allegedly continuing association with far-right groups and neo-Nazi ideology, its use of controversial symbols linked to Nazism, and early allegations that members of the groups participated in torture and war crimes. Some experts are critical of the regiment's role within the larger Azov movement, a political umbrella group made up of veterans and organizations linked to Azov, and its possible far-right political ambitions, despite claims of the regiment's depolitization. Others argue that the regiment has evolved beyond its origins as street militia, tempering its neo-Nazi and far-right underpinnings as it became part of the National Guard. So it could be that the Russian media is far overstating the real influence of the Azov battalion. In fact, Ukraine's Vladimir Zelensky sees the battalion as a potential threat and does not want the group to gain more influence. On top of that, it is quite ironic that Russia's mercenary group WAGNER is created by a known neo-Nazi. Because yes, Ukraine has a problem with neo-Nazis, but so does Russia. But propaganda works not because it's good in explaining things, but it repeats a narrative over and over to stop any other discussion, so most people don't even start to ask the right questions. If minds are preoccupied, alternative information will get ignored. In the West, prior to the invasion of Ukraine, the country was seen way more critically by media outlets. Ukraine was considered to be one of the most corrupt countries in Europe. Headlines were quite often critical. That changed after the war. Since the invasion started, Ukrainians are seen in a mostly positive light to secure support from Western democracies. In the end, the truth is somewhere in the middle. It's a boring reality that Ukraine was a troubled land before the invasion, has some problems with far-right groups, but is not a neo-fascist superstate. Facts will often be ignored, just because reality can often disappoint. A complex situation is far harder to incorporate into ideological reasoning. So in the eyes of the West, every Ukrainian is a selfless hero, and in the eyes of the Russians, every Ukrainian is a Nazi villain. But if you want to know the real reasons why countries are facing off in Eastern Europe, you have to set aside ideology and morale. Geopolitics is a chess game. No country on earth would sacrifice resources, influence and power over morality. You wouldn't think about the ethical consequences to checkmate your opponent in a chess game. And unfortunately, this is how strategists and world leaders tend to think. Don't get me wrong, I don't like this reality. But again, that is the boring truth. And we are all part of this. My channel, for example. I get a lot of comments of people who accuse me of being a World Economic Forum agent or a Russian bot, sometimes in the comment section of the same video. I never really speak about my personal thoughts on this, and I get often asked on which side I am on. And I have to tell you that this question is not a good question to ask in the first place. Because I'm on no side. I worry about humanity as a whole. I worry about Ukrainian civilians, Russian civilians that don't want to be part of that conflict. I worry about people in the Middle East and Africa who will struggle to get food. I worry about Western societies drifting off from democracy, either in a neoliberal super-corporate environment or a far-right environment. I worry about too much tension and no focus on all the other problems. Climate change, social issues, and with that I mean, for example, the wrong relationship we have to technology, the decline of the standard of living, short, collapse. And that's the only thing I care about. Now, to come back to the conflict in Ukraine. With all the propaganda noise aside, where do we stand? Well, it's hard to tell right now. In the past days, as of writing this video, Russia has gained some territory. There are fears of a second wave of mobilization, and like I reported in the last Ukraine update, there is the possibility of a northern offensive. But it could also be a tactic to divide Ukrainian attention. So before there are more signs of a northern offensive happening, we should look at it as a hypothetical option. A change that will have consequences is a new leading general of the Ukraine conflict. Russia ordered its top general to take charge of its invasion of Ukraine in the biggest shakeup yet of its military command structure after months of battlefield defeats. Russia's defense ministry said on Wednesday that Minister of Defense Sergei Shoigu appointed Chief of General Staff Valery Gerasimov as overall commander of forces for what Moscow calls its special military operation in Ukraine. This is the highest ranking military officer in the Russian army. So this is the commanding structure of Russia that we would expect in an all-out war. So does that mean that the conflict will further escalate? We have to wait and see. In a few weeks, I will be back with a full-length update on the situation. In the meantime, if you want to know more about the conflict in Ukraine, you should check out this video about the Russian nuclear arsenal. Or you watch this video about China's ambitions and why it's more dangerous than you think. Please leave a like and subscribe if you liked this video. My name is Dennis. Thank you for watching and goodbye.